What is up, everyone? And you will not believe what we have in store today. Chris, help me out with this, man.
Yeah, we have probably one of the most exciting guests to date right now. We have F1 data analyst on Twitter. I found this guy's Twitter like when we first started the podcast. We were looking around, following people, and I started seeing all these cool technical graphs. And I'm an engineer by career and study, so I started nerding out to all his stuff, and I knew I had to reach out and try to get him on here. And luckily, he agreed. So uh, let's take a moment to introduce yourself, Mirko.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm the, let's say, owner of the F1 data analysis page that I just opened a bit over 1 month ago. And I had, as I was speaking before with Tyler, quite a steep growth trajectory. I would say far beyond my expectations. That just started because many people were telling me, Mirko, you often do this analysis and these comparisons for us in WhatsApp groups. I would really like to learn more about these things and to see more detailed analysis. And so I thought, well, I already take the time to do this analysis for other people in WhatsApp groups or to speak with friends. I could, at that point, also share this analysis in a dedicated page. And so that's what I did a bit more than 1 month ago. And I started improving my content and giving always more detail on every analysis than on the previous one and so on. So I'm really excited to have started and been carrying on this journey. And of course, also of being in this podcast that is also my first podcast in general. So regarding myself or my page. So that's really cool.
Dude,
Yeah, well, we're
yeah.
super excited to have you on here, and I think the content you put out really speaks to why you saw so much growth because I haven't seen anyone else doing what you're doing, and honestly, it's some of the best stuff that I've seen in the F1 Twitter world.
It is insanely impressive, the content that you're putting out right now, from how deep you go with information and data to how it affects, from week to week basis to how they looked from the start to now. And like you said, to have a goal of 1,000 followers the first month and then absolutely exceed that and smash it out of the park. I can't be any more impressed with your entire Twitter page. You go so into depth with everything, and it's really awesome to see.
Thank you. Yeah, the fact is that Twitter at the same time gives you a very small word limit. And that's the most difficult thing because you have so much to say about a single analysis and you really have to condense it into a couple of words, a couple of sentences. So that's really hard. However, it's been an interesting experience because you really tend to condense the informations in the clearest and smallest way possible. Of course, I also write sometimes extended analysis that I publish on Reddit or on my Buy Me Coffee or similar. But there is this double face aspect that's really interesting about Twitter, I would say.
Yeah, no, it forces you to get creative with how can I make this insanely clickable and insanely interactive while getting all of the points across, but keeping it to a very okay, all these buzzwords we got, Ferrari more power here, Mercedes less power here. Try to keep it as bullet point as possible, but you still want to get your point across with being super in depth with details. So I can see how sometimes it could be difficult with the only 140 characters that you have. Or no, it's more now. It's more now.
Yeah,
but
it's 280.
280, yeah.
Still not a lot. And
still
of course,
not
many of the things that you say are under some hypothesis. For example, Ferrari has more power than Mercedes is only true under some hypothesis. And rarely you have the space to describe the hypothesis. So you really have to try to say something that is correct but at the same time using not many characters, and that's a real struggle, I would say.
Yeah, that speaking of that, you have to make a lot of assumptions. I think we should move right into some of our thoughts. I've been seeing a lot of people talking on Twitter about the current regulations. Some people are very upset with them, and they think that the changes, they didn't make the racing better. They think they should take it back to the old regulations. From your analysis, where do you see things? Do you think the racing is getting more exciting, closer? Is it too soon to really say if these new regulations should stay or go?
Well, I was one of the main critics of the new regulations, I should say, meaning that when they were announced, I really feared that Formula One was headed into an IndyCar trajectory with more similar cars, still different, but more similar, with less space for engineering and differences. I have to say that after seeing the results of the regulations, not just the car following, but all the implications of on-car design, that these fears were justified, but were not correct in the end. I've been really positively, I think that the regulations have been the best, have developed in the best way possible, or in the best way that I could conceive. They allowed closer following. The cars really are able to follow more closely, especially in the faster sections, in the medium and faster corners. And at the same time, the DRS effect is still strong because the rear wing is more or less as big as it was previously. And also the cars did not decrease too much in performance. They mostly lost performance due to the weight increase. If we remove the effect of the weight increase, which is more or less 3/10 for every 10 kilograms, so the car weight increases of 50 kilograms, around 1.5 seconds per lap, just from weight. If we remove that effect, the cars are as fast as the previous year's one, which were already close to the fastest ever in 2020. So yeah, I think it's been a win on every side.
And you know what? I didn't even think about that in the first place. Right when those regulations got announced and the car was unveiled and everything, you're right. It did look like at first glance it was going to head into an IndyCar direction, but just like everyone thinks, I have been pleasantly surprised because yes, it is closer following, almost to a fault. Some people just can't seem to get around people nowadays, but they 100% can follow closely. The cars are still fast. It's a very, very competitive grid this year with everyone testing out new setups, new designs. We saw some people get it right out of the gate, and we saw some people get it wrong. And it's been nice to see the competitiveness back and forth with the grid mix up and everything looking, and it's been really exciting.
Yeah, and I think to speak to that, Tyler, like you can see like at the start of the season it was Ferrari domination, and now Red Bull showed up this last weekend and they really put a clinic on the whole grid, and they were, Max was leading from start to finish, and Checo looked phenomenal.
Yeah, Checo looked really good.
I think part of the fact that a lot of people couldn't pass this weekend was had to do with the rain, because you saw there was one main dry line throughout the whole track, and then if you wanted to try to make a move, you're gonna have to get in the
You're gonna have to territory. Risk something, yeah.
Yeah, you might, and I think a lot of the overtakes happened when everyone was on intermediates.
Actually, yeah, I think you're right. That does make sense. That actually does make sense. What did you think about overall on this weekend? Were you predicting everyone else to finish kind of where they were finishing on the grid, Mirko?
No, I wouldn't. I would have predicted the Ferrari to be stronger, maybe not stronger than Red Bull, but more or less equal. while in fact Red Bull proved to be the most dominant in this race compared to the previous races. In Jeddah, so in Saudi Arabia, they were, I think, the best car, especially in qualifying, but also in the race, but not by such a big margin. Here, we've seen a margin which was more closer to the Ferrari domination of Australia. A bit less, but still a very dominant car. So depending on the track and especially the correct setup or not, you will see one or the other car dominating in the first races, where setup and the correct setup will be the key. I think that from this aspect, the event being a sprint race event played a role, meaning that they only had one testing session to get the setup right. And I think
which is insane.
Red Bull really aced the setup, while Ferrari probably could have improved further. So maybe with 3 testing sessions, we would have seen 2 very similar cars. But as unfolded, the Red Bull has been the best car in this race. Not just in qualifying, but also in the race from a tire management and graining point of view.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, we've been saying it since the start of the season. The only thing holding Red Bull back from dominating this year once again, especially with now Checo in the mix, really fighting for P2 or P3 for himself, it's just the reliability. It's the only thing that's going to keep him back. I understand they finished this weekend. They were absolutely dominant. Max got a grand slam. It was a perfect weekend for Red Bull. But it's so far, the stat that scares me is that Verstappen has won every race he's finished. He's already had 2 DNFs. We can't keep going. DNF wins race. DNF wins race.
Yeah.
Now, if next race he doesn't DNF, then I'll start buying into the hype. But right now, I just have to see it consecutively 2 weekends in a row.
Yeah, and I also have, if I remember correctly, Verstappen is currently 29 points behind Leclerc, and if he did not have any reliability issues, he would have 36 points more. So he would be in front of Leclerc. Yeah, so Leclerc is in front of Verstappen just due to reliability. From a pure performance of both the car and the driver, Verstappen would be in front of Leclerc. So if Red Bull solves the reliability issues, they are currently, I would say, the car with the most probability of winning the drivers and maybe also constructors championship. But Ferrari still has to bring any upgrades. Yeah,
I think
the season is long, very long.
Yeah, I think that brings into some good points. One, I read that I think they brought 2 Red Bull brought 2 upgrades to this last race, and I mean you could see that they clearly were, there were no questions asked. They were the fastest car out there. And then second point is this weekend kind of proved to me, Max is the number 1. Him and Leclerc are definitely the 2 best drivers right now, in my opinion. But I think Max is just edges out just slightly more than him.
Yeah. Before this race, I would say that the 2 are matched because neither Leclerc or Verstappen did any mistakes up to this race. But with this race being considered, Verstappen is now in front of Leclerc from a driver point of view for this season because he did virtually no mistakes, while Leclerc did one at
it just ended up costing him a little bit. Yeah,
and I also think that the problem that Verstappen had at the start was more linked to the gear sync than to himself. So we could say that Verstappen did a mistake at the start, but I think it's more due to the car and not the perfect software of the gearbox.
Yeah, some hardware issues. So I know earlier you also said they didn't with the sprint race format, it definitely cut down on their opportunities to plan for the weekend and get their setup right. What are your thoughts on sprint races? I think this sprint race seemed really interesting to me. I kind of like the idea of having the sprint race format because it makes every day of the race weekend like that much more exciting because you're qualifying on Friday, you're sprint racing Saturday, and then you're racing Sunday. I don't know if maybe the time change makes these days different, but in America, like that's what our schedule looks like, early Friday. But yeah, like I kind of am a fan of the sprint races, and I see a lot of people are hating on them. What are your thoughts?
Well, regarding sprint races, I have to say that the sprint race itself is often quite enjoyable, I would say, and this has been confirmed in Imola, which, by the way, is like 100 kilometers from here.
Yeah, I'm so jealous.
I'm really close to Imola. And but regarding the sprint races, as I said, I think that the event itself is cool and enjoyable. It does not take much time, and you can see many overtakes, another start, another first laps of adrenaline, and so on. The problem is that it reduces the importance of the remaining events. So the qualifying is less important because if you arrive first, you are not sure of starting first in the race. And also the race, when you arrive at the race, you already know how fast the cars are. We already knew that the Ferrari was was more severe on the tires compared to Red Bull, and that Red Bull had more pace. We also saw the pace of the Alpha, of the Haas, and Mercedes. So yeah, the sprint race by itself is something that I enjoy watching, but I would also add that it reduces the enjoyability of the remaining of the weekend.
Which that makes sense. That makes sense.
I say mixed feelings about that. I think that was not needed. While, for instance, the regulation changes are a win, 100%, the sprint races are meh. You have some positive and some negative things.
Yeah, because you're right. You're right. I mean, you're exactly right with how it is. It is enjoyable to watch. It's not, sprint races aren't bad. They, just like you said it, they just make everything else not as shiny, not as cool, not as important.
One thing of the sprint race that it has less than the race is the strategy, because you start with the same tire that you end on. So you can just say, for example, let's see how the soft compares to the medium in the first and the last part of the stint, but there is no alternative strategies or safety cars mixing the pit stop strategies and so on. So I think it's a bit, it has positives, but I can also see clearly some limitations compared to the original event.
What if they did some kind of hybrid where because I thought I read that they were going to do some rule changes to the sprint races where it would look more like this. What if instead of having the sprint race determine the whole grid structure for the race day, what if you stick with the qualifying and then you give the sprint race winner P1, and then that way, you win the sprint race, you get a prize there, or maybe the top 3 get to be top 3, but then everyone else's qualifying still weighs into the formula, I guess, for the race day.
Well, yeah, I thought about some alternative versions of the sprint race. I would say that one could be that qualifying gives you the order of the actual race, and then there is a reverse grid sprint race where, for instance, the first 8 take the points as currently. So
I like that.
Yeah, so that it makes sense to participate in the sprint race because you can take points, and 8 points are a lot. But at the same time, if you did not have the reverse grid thing, the last teams would not even participate, because when you start 20th, you are sure not to arrive 8th after 20 laps. But given that, for example, you are a Williams driver and you start first or second or third, you can try to defend your position. At the same time, if you are Verstappen and are starting 20th, you really have to watch your time, because you only have 20 laps to gain as many positions as possible. And if you crash out, it's not such a big deal because the points are not so many. So that is the way I would change the sprint races event, personally.
I like that. I like that a lot. That sounds really exciting. And I mean, it seems like the whole reason they brought in the sprint race is because they want to see overtakes. They want to see action. So what better way to cause action than put your race leaders in the back of the pack and watch them try to fight their way back to the top?
Yeah. In fact, I would say that reverse grids are not something in the DNA of Formula One, because you have to give a prize to who's stronger and not who has done his homework worse.
It can't just be like a participation thing. I hear you.
Yeah, but if the points are not so many and you still have time to improve your position, then it would be more acceptable in my opinion.
Yeah. No, I hear you. That makes sense. That definitely makes sense because, like you said, you don't want it to be, okay, everybody that's involved in the race, everybody can get points, but you want it to make it competitive to where it isn't the situation to like we have it currently where the sprint race kind of just takes away the importance of the rest of the weekend. You just don't want to do that again because it's like, it just becomes this parade of cars. So no, yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying, and honestly, I would love to see it that way. I think they should definitely test it at least once.
Yeah, I think so, but there are probably also many other variations that I did not think about, and they are even better. Let's see what they found out, what they decide from here to the next 2 or 3 years. I think we'll see many variations of some aspects.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they're testing it out, so yeah, might as well try out different rules and stuff like that. But yeah, I think we should get into the nitty gritty and start talking about some of your technical work that you've done. You shared a couple images with us.
Yep.
So if you want to share your screen, we'll put this up on the video for those watching on YouTube. And yeah, let's get into some IMOLA talk.
Yeah, okay, perfect. So now, talking about the analysis, I would like to start with the Russell and Hamilton comparison, because everybody has seen Hamilton arguing with Toto Wolff. We don't yet know, and probably will never know, the topic of the discussion, but seeing the context and how unhappy Hamilton was with the setup, I'm quite sure that the discussion was about the setup, because they did not do any mistakes regarding, for instance, when to go out with the cars and so on. So I think that the argument was about the setup. And by comparing the telemetries of Hamilton and Russell, we can really see a difference in setup. So for instance, if we compare the speed as a function of distance for both drivers, we can see that Hamilton had a lower downforce setup. In reality, the setup of Hamilton was quite a low downforce setup. In fact, he scored I think, going by memory, the third highest speed with his Mercedes out of the 10 different cars. And this is something unprecedented, because the Mercedes was always the slowest or second slowest car in the speed tracks. So they really went into a different direction compared to the previous races. But due to the rain in qualifying, Russell was at a significant advantage. And I think that the different setup was also the reason why Hamilton was behind of Russell. I think that with the same setup, and considering that Hamilton was only 1/10 slower than Russell, he would have been in front of Russell at the start. But just, yeah. So any consideration?
Yeah, no, yeah. I actually think you're right, and I'm looking at this now, and you can just see that Russell is with the setup that he has on his car compared to the ones of Lewis, he is just exponentially faster in the corners than he's just not. I don't. I think you're right. I think the argument was with the setup because you even saw on the radio message at the end of their race, Toto himself just apologizing for what the car is like right now. That's not the car he deserves to drive. And I think it's showing right now. And you're right that with the comparison with this, George, just with his setup and them being different, you can definitely tell they got it right with George's and maybe are doing a little bit of just different stuff, trying just a few different things with Hamilton, and they're just not working out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider also, like during the race itself, was Hamilton got stuck behind in the DRS train, and he wasn't really able to overtake, whereas Russell got a good break of luck at the start of the race and got some good positions gained and was able to kind of have a more open road than Lewis was.
Yeah, I think that also the two had the correct setup for the race, considering their respective positions. I mean, Russell was alone for most of the race, so he did not have to defend or attack for most of the race, of course. And so the lower top speed was not a problem, while the better starting position was really precious in this case. While on the other side, Hamilton has not been able to overtake Gasly for the whole race, and had he had the Russell setup, so the higher downforce setup, he would have been completely unable to catch up the Alpha Tauri. So maybe for the race he would have been benefited with an even lower downforce and drag setup, because even though Hamilton did post a good top speed in qualifying, it was not enough to overtake in the race. So this is something, in my opinion, really interesting. And we can see that from the graph, Hamilton has indeed a lower drag setup from every straight, because in every straight he reaches a top speed which is 1 to 3 kilometers per hour higher than the one of Russell. And also where Hamilton loses a lot of time is under braking. If we look at, for example, the fast corner, curiously, he more or less follows the same trace of Russell. And also if you look at the delta time graph, you see no significant difference, but at every braking point, you can see that the speed of Hamilton is much lower than the one by Russell, and he loses a lot of time there.
I think that's also what's standing out for me the most is everything under the braking points, because it drops off dramatically.
Yeah, you see that in every straight, Hamilton gains time, and the farther he is in the straight, the more the speed difference, because for the same power, the increased drag is even more significant for Russell compared to Hamilton. So the closer you are to the braking point, and the more Hamilton improves compared to Russell. But then at almost every braking point, Russell goes up with his delta, and then at the minimum speed point, he finally goes in front of Hamilton, and his additional speed in the remaining straights are not enough to catch up. So this is my very rough interpretations of these graphs. And I would like also to discuss about the mini sectors map, because we confirm what is already seen in the graphs in the speed trace. So we can really see that Hamilton dominates like more than 80% of the track. And this is not sufficient to stay in front of Russell for two reasons. One is that the areas in which Hamilton dominates have a higher average speed. So even though we are looking at distances, considering that they are distances covered at higher speeds, the time required by the let's say, white and green parts are not in scale. They are in scale in distance, but not in time. So for instance, a small green part can take as much time as a bigger white part. And also I see that the speed difference in the white regions is smaller than the speed difference in the green region. So those very small parts in which Russell is faster are in reality parts where you need much more time to cover because you are going more slowly, and his advantage in the green parts is more than the advantage that Hamilton has in the white parts, because the drag causes a less significant speed advantage than, for instance, braking confidently.
No,
So this is
I
what
think
is
it's spot
the
on.
graph.
I think the graph is literally spot on because it's exactly right. We all know all these drivers on track are going to go flat out on the straight. So the important time to make up, which we're seeing in this graph where Russell is, and he's doing an excellent job, is with even with his setup that's different from Hamilton's. That's where he's making all of his time up. He's flat out. He's not in comparison to Lewis on the straights, but the straights with this type of car doesn't really matter because Mercedes has it's almost seems like they've focused on the straight line speed and it's lost everything in the corners depending on the setups between drivers. And of course, you're going to have some drivers that brake later than others. You're going to have some drivers that, like, there's a lot of variables that go into that, but just flat out data of where he's making up his time and still beating Hamilton, because that graph tells me one thing. Lewis Hamilton, like you said, has 80% of the track mastered, but for whatever reason, Russell is still beating him on time, and that's when it shows you that it's not going to matter if you're just fast on straights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, on this graph you're showing, it shows their times. I mean, Hamilton's not that far off of Russell's time. So I mean, if you give him a similar setup, who knows what he could have done on race day, really. I think a lot of people they're quick to shove Hamilton in the bin because he's old and no, yeah, whatever. The car's not the best as it was, but I mean, you can clearly see he's still competitive.
Oh,
And
he still's got pace. They just need to figure out a few things, man.
yeah, given the right setup, I think, man, it would be exciting to see him come into the mix with those top teams.
Yeah, I think that he is he's probably in the top 3 of his generation, together with Alonso, and Alonso is a bit older, but you understand what I mean. And maybe one thing that changes the things is that Russell is really used to cars that are really hard to drive. I remember the 2019 car, which was undrivable. It was not just slow. It was not just a car with high drag and low downforce, but it was also a very difficult car to handle. If you look at the onboards, it is uncomparable, for example, with the Haas from the last years. The Haas from last year was just a slow car, but it was quite drivable. If you look at the Williams, you can see that the car understeers on entry and then oversteers on corner exit, like the 2014 Ferrari, for example. So I think that he's really used to like compensate for the deficiencies of the car more than Hamilton, which is very fast, but is used to a car which is very sharp and planted. And also you have to consider that these cars are very different to the ones from the last years. And when cars change so much, different drivers can adapt differently. For example, even in 2019, Ricciardo was not able to brake as confidently as before, just because he changed the team and also the regulations changed a bit, and he was suddenly not the very strong driver that he was before. So I think that also the cars favor different drivers, and also Hamilton is also surely like not very happy with the car, and also down in morale, as also Sainz, I think, after these 2 races. So also the psychological aspect is fundamental.
Yeah, it can't be good with the mental, and especially with signs like you said, coming off a brand new, fresh 2-year contract signing just to DNF. And I know it was unfortunate. That really wasn't his fault. He was just caught in the crossfire. But it just has to be just mentally taxing every day.
I mean,
Something else has to be happening.
especially when he had disappointing qualifying where he crashed out there. Then he had some good momentum coming into the race because he made up all that in the sprint race, and then first lap, boom, just like that, you're out of the race. Like, oh, that's got to be, man. And all the people on the internet too. Like, that's definitely going to affect him. But I'm hoping to see him bounce back in Miami. One other chart that I saw that you sent that was pretty interesting was the team's top speeds.
Yeah.
I
Was
wanted
it-
to ask about this a lot.
Yeah, it looks. Is this the data from the Imola race?
Yeah, this is the data from IMOLA race, and one additional detail, it is the top speed recorded throughout all the lap of the fastest car of the team. So for instance, if you look at Mercedes, you see 299 because that was the speed of the fastest Mercedes car, which was Russell's one, while for example, Hamilton has a top speed of 302. So yeah, to make things comparable, I just consider the fastest car as considered the best one, the one with the best setup. But
No, that makes perfect sense.
You can also have, for example, in case of Mercedes, two cars with slightly different setups. But for the majority of the teams, the cars have the same setup. Also, at least considering wing levels, also for simplicity, not to introduce too many variables and to have to do twice the work. So, as I said, Hamilton's Mercedes has a top speed which would have been tied for third with Aston Martin. And we also see that the Mercedes engine cars really had a nice top speed, with Williams being the fastest.
Which is surprising.
Yeah, and Williams, I have to say, it's consistently the fastest Mercedes car. It's a car with a really low drag, even though the engine is not very powerful. It also reaches good top speeds. The problem is that it has no downforce.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
There's
But
nothing making it stick to the track. Yeah.
yeah. But I have to say that with Albon, the car has a very nice race pace, and it's really easy on its tires. And I think that this is also due to the driver, because most of the times when a car has a low downforce, it tends to slide on the track. And if you require all the performance from the car, this sliding leads to higher tire degradation.
Yeah, leads to flat spots, leads to degrading faster, leads to just being slower, period. Yeah, it's just a slew of problems. Go ahead, Chris.
That's got to speak a lot to Alex Albon, because he lasted on those hard tires for so long when they were in Australia.
Yeah, I think that he really found the key about making a lower downforce not eat its tires. I think that he's really gentle in the corners. He knows the limits of the car and does not ask too much to the car, knowing that maybe he could go sometimes faster this lap, but then he would lose that performance over the next lap. So I think he's really doing a very nice comeback. And you can also see that the engine power is not the first aspect regarding the top speed, because from Williams to McLaren, you have a very significant difference in top speed, while the engine is, of course, the same. And also, the top speed is not even a good indicator of car performance, because the McLaren has been much faster than the Williams in the last race, even though it's the slowest car by far. Surely it would have been a problem in case they were engaged with other cars. They would not have been able to overtake easily and would be easily overtaken by faster cars. But yeah, when you are just driving in free air alone, just the lap time is important. How you obtain that is
yeah, you're right. How you obtain it doesn't really matter. It just matters that, hey, did you get the result? Great, that's awesome. Let's keep doing what we're doing right there. And so-
That's got to be scary though for Ferrari when you're looking at Red Bull, how they had the highest top speed and just yeah, their performance on the weekend was absolutely insane.
Yeah, the Red Bull is consistently the fastest cars in top speed. I think that
oh, we
the
got to
on-
segue into this next graph with that.
the only weekend in which it was not the fastest car was, I think, Australia, where Alpine, if I remember correctly, was even faster, but it's consistently the fastest or second fastest car. It's a really low drag concept, even though it does not have the highest power. But as I said, the drag makes the most difference. So yeah, it's a really good car in race stream, and as long as it does not hit its tires, as for instance happened in Bahrain. So as long as here they are able to manage the tires, they are very difficult to fight because they are very fast in the straights.
Yeah, no, you can see this because with this next graph with Verstappen, Leclerc, and Russell, I mean, the Red Bull car looks like it's pretty well versed in almost every area of the track. It's spread out pretty evenly. You have them, very fast in most of the straights, but you also like he looks very good in the corners. The Red Bull car looks very good everywhere. Very literally, I think their only problem is the reliability. And then the Ferrari, you could say the same. It was a little less than Verstappen because like we said, I think Verstappen was just faster, period, throughout the weekend. But Ferrari looks very well rounded. So
Yeah, they are both very versatile cars, and as always are the fastest cars. And but where Ferrari is unmatched is the out of corner acceleration. It has
yeah,
very, very good mechanical grip, and as you can see in the map, it has the highest minimum speed, so that speaks about the mechanical traction and grip. And also, it's able to push to put all the power on the track, and also it has the highest power, and the power is also geared towards the lower speed. So the power deployment of the battery is really geared on the first gears rather than the top ones. So you can really see, for example, when Leclerc tried to follow Perez, he really gained in the first part of the straight, and then when the higher efficiency of the Red Bull came into play, you can see that it almost evened out the slipstream effect for Leclerc. So they reached more or less the same speed, just a bit higher concerning Leclerc without the DRS.
yeah. I mean, that just goes to tell you how important that, like you said, the top speed right out of braking, they just get to it that much faster than everybody else. Like everybody will get to that top speed, but they're just getting that much faster at it. And which is surprising because you saw the start. They had a little bit of a slow start, but I mean, like you said with this graph, they make it all up just by going under braking.
Yeah. I think that the higher downforce of the Ferrari car also helps them under braking, but in that also driver confidence plays a major role. So Ferrari or Red Bull are more or less matched, except for the fact that Ferrari brakes up to a higher speed, so they can start the cornering and accelerating out of the corner sooner. So that's where they gain time. But in this race, they have been very close cars in terms of setup, as in Australia, where, for instance, in Jeddah or in Bahrain, you could really see differences in the way the performance was delivered.
Yeah, and I'm taking a look at this other graph that you had that shows Verstappen, Leclerc, and Russell with their speeds over the race and then their deltas. And yeah, it's it's crazy, man. You just look at the graph with the Mercedes and it's just basically like trending perfectly, like straight up. And then you got
there is no single part in which the Mercedes is he is better, I would say. It only gains time, for instance, in 2 braking points, but it also starts braking from a much lower speed. And you can really see that the high downforce setup of Russell really makes him eat the battery charge towards the end of the straight. You can see that, for instance, in the straight after the fast corner, the clipping is insane. You see that he's
Oh
not.
no, yeah, that is
He's
insane.
not lifting the throttle, but he loses like 10 kilometers per hour just from clipping. While for instance, the Ferrari and especially Red Bull really push up to the end of the straight with no problems whatsoever.
And that's got to be a Max thing too. That man's going to push in every corner if he can, if the tires allow him to.
Yeah, and you can see it's insane how repetitive, how it does repeat. But in every straight, almost, you see that the Mercedes almost matches the acceleration profile of the other cars, and probably because even though it has a lower peak power, it has a different energy management strategy, so it gives more power in the lower gears. But then the battery really empties and the car stops accelerating. And in this qualifying without the DRS, you need more time to cover the straights. So the battery empties even more. So this becomes an even more significant problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I mean you're right. Man, we saw the DRS detection zones, they were open very late in this race too. So they really didn't come to play at all in this race until what, maybe the last 10, 15 laps of it. And even then, I mean by that time everybody had their place up and it didn't help anybody. You saw, I mean, Albon leading the train, it was Albon, Gasly, and Hamilton. Hamilton couldn't get past Gasly because he had DRS as well, but Gasly couldn't even get past Hamilton without, or not Hamilton, Gasly couldn't get past Albon because for whatever reason, Albon didn't have DRS and he still couldn't get past him. So it's like,
Yeah.
I don't understand where that comes in.
As I shown before, Albon had the highest top speed in qualifying, matching Verstappen's. So it was really hard to overtake. And you can see that Hamilton was not able to pass the AlphaTauri, and they had equal conditions because both had the DRS, but the AlphaTauri was not able to pass the Williams, even though the Williams had no DRS. So a quite a slow car as the Williams really was able to defend very well.
Yeah, that's where their strength came in. Like you could definitely see their strength on display right there in defending and keeping the top speeds of, they're going to play into exactly what they do good. And I mean, it showed. Nobody could get past him, even with DRS. Like he held them back perfectly.
Speaking of Williams, I just realized that Latifi didn't spin out not once on race day.
We
or
had
in
a
the
weekend without a Latifi spin. Yes.
It was not necessary since Hamilton was 14th. So
he already did his job. He didn't need to do anything.
he was saving the car for better occasions.
Really making it count on his weekend. We might see one in Miami for the debut. Make it exciting.
Yeah, and then I think we got one last graph to look at. You want to dive in on this one a little bit?
Yeah, because man, this seems like some serious math going on right here.
It's not the math is not very difficult. What's difficult is preparing the data and selecting the correct data set to use. So what I did here was a first attempt, and it's subject to errors, and I will improve it a lot, I hope, in the next weeks. But what I tried to do was to estimate the power and the drag of the car simultaneously. Because even though it seems more difficult to obtain them simultaneously, if you are estimating the drag, you can also estimate the power and vice versa. So what I did was plotting the longitudinal acceleration of the car as a function of its speed. So of course, the faster the car is moving, the lower its its acceleration, because the engine, the power is the product of force and speed. So for a given power, the force is power divided by speed. So the higher the speed, the lower the force. And so consequently, the lower the acceleration. But you also have the effect of the drag. So the faster you are moving, the higher is the drag resistance, and so the lower is the force that pushes you forward. So this is the reason that you see a graph where the acceleration reduces with speed, and the point in which these curves intersect the x-axis is the top speed of the car.
Yeah, so this tells us perfectly that they're just deploying all their energy with the initial acceleration and battery charge. And once it's out, you can see the drop off.
Yeah, you can really see the level of acceleration that the car can obtain for every speed level. So for instance, if you compare Ferrari with Red Bull, you would see, for example, a higher acceleration of the Ferrari at lower speeds because it has more power and more energy deployment at lower speeds. But also then at a certain point, the acceleration becomes higher for the Red Bull because of the lower drag. But comparing the Ferrari with the Mercedes in Bahrain, you see that the Ferrari pushes more at every speed. So it has both more power and also a better drag to power ratio compared to Mercedes. So what I did was to select the points during the qualifying lap in which the DRS was active, because you want to compare apple to apples, and also because when the DRS is active, you are not cornering, so you don't have the cornering force that slows you down because it causes additional friction. I've also selected only the points with the 100% throttle over 10,000 RPMs, no brake engaged, and other conditions that allowed me to select the very parts of the straights where you can compare the power and the drag of the cars. And then I also corrected for the slope of the track. So from the elevation of the track and the distance covered, I've obtained through a derivative the slope in that point, and used that to calculate the contribute of acceleration that was just due to the raw slope. So all in all, you obtain all these colored points relative to each car, and then you can fit the function that I've reported on the top that should give you the acceleration as a function of speed. In this case, it's a regression problem because you already know the acceleration and the speed, and that's the single point that you are plotting. So it's an inverse problem in which you instead obtain the P on M ratio and the D on M ratio, and then with the mass of the car being known, you can estimate the power and drag. But in this case, there is no doubt that the Ferrari has both a higher power and a lower drag. So this is what you can discern from this graph, and I plan to use this kind of comparison also in the next Grand Prix, also adding Red Bull and other cars to the mix.
Yeah, and please, guys, pay attention to this because this graph is insane. This really is an eye-opening.
And when you explain the level of detail you put into like picking the data, and you really took a big step in making sure everything is as even as possible. And yeah, I think this is some exciting
you
stuff
really
right
have
here.
gone above and beyond with these graphs, man. Like I haven't seen anybody in the space and the community as well as you're doing it right now, and as clear as you're doing it right now. This makes perfect sense because this aligns with every weekend we've had.
Yeah, and there is no limit on the level of detail that you can go. For instance, one person wrote me on Twitter before, after seeing this graph, he complimented, and he also made me, suggested me to take the slipstream effect or the tow effect into account. For instance, I could add another variable, another condition, that the car must not have another car in front of it in the next, for example, half a kilometer. Of course, this is something that increases the complexity and also decreases the number of data that you have, because it's an additional condition that must be satisfied. However, if you have all the time in the world, you can like consider many laps from the two drivers of the two cars and obtain the most accurate answer that you can possibly have. Of course, this is not part of my PhD, but it's just a side project that I'm conducting. So I think that I'm quite happy with the results, but still I will try to find for some simple ways to increase the accuracy.
No,
Yeah, I mean,
absolutely.
I think for the level of detail that you put into it right now it's a great way to get the point across what you're trying to do. You know, it's kind of like what you were saying earlier about Twitter. Like, yeah, it's hard to fit everything in. Like you can keep talking and writing about it. And just like this, you can keep making more and more assumptions to get it as perfect as possible. But I think this is really great. And it really just paints the picture.
Yeah, Mirko, you've been an insanely insightful guest that we've had. Like that, I love getting to nerd out over this. I love actually seeing the graphs, but also it making sense because we see the cars do this. But I just want to thank you. We're getting to that point now to where we're gonna have to wrap this one up. But I
Okay.
I really do just want to express and just thank you in abundance, because this has been very insightful and you've been an insanely awesome guest. And I'm sorry for some of the technical difficulties we've had today, but this has been a very, very good episode.
Thank you.
Definitely. Everyone go check him out on Twitter at F1 Data Analysis. You can also check us out on Twitter at TLUP, TLUP F1. Watch this video on YouTube. Leave some comments. Follow us. Check out all of our stuff. You know, we got a lot more coming out this year. Hopefully, we can get you back on the show.
Yeah,
And
surely in the next month, I think we can make some time pass, and then when there are new contents, I can come back. And I would also like to add that I'm also on Instagram with the same name. And if you enjoy my contents, you can share my analysis. I would really appreciate that.
Please show him all the love in the world.
And also you can, this is something crazy, I would say, you can also become the sponsor of an analysis, because I have a Buy Me a Coffee page in which you can make a small donation and ask for a specific analysis. So if you have some specific curiosity, like for instance, as I've written, if you are interested on the power advantage that Hamilton had in Brazil last year or something else, you can ask for a dedicated analysis by making a small donation, and you will I will show you also your name on the graph as the sponsor. So this is just another thing that you can do.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think me and Tyler are gonna get together and we're gonna think of a really silly analysis that we want to see, and we will be buying you a coffee soon. So.
No, you've already both that with inviting me in this podcast, because I really enjoyed that, and it's also good to improve my English and to just train. And it's my first podcast ever, so it's been a very singular and interesting
Oh,
experience.
yeah, man. Dude, it was a pleasure to have you on. It was a pleasure meeting you. But guys, this has been episode 11 of the Lockup Podcast featuring F1 data analysis. Check out all of his stuff. Every link to his stuff will be in the link to description, and we will catch you guys later. See ya.
Ciao.
See ya.